Hey guys, and welcome to a video covering if the more expensive unlockable abilities, including limitless, are worth it for melee. So when you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax, and enjoy. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the following four abilities: Greater Barge, Greater Flurry, Limitless, previously being a sigil, and Greater Fury. Do not mistake this video for a DPS rotation video, however, I will show how these abilities work and can be used to increase your damage or help your survivability, especially when talking about Limitless. Now, I initially planned to create a video solely focused around the Limitless ability, but because the greater abilities are something you usually buy before that, and using in combination with Limitless, I'm going to do it all in one video to make it clear. To keep it simple, I will not be using any invention switches in this video for rotations like lunging or a flanking switch, but I will be using the Impatient Invention perk and the Fury of the Small Archaeology Relic to increase my adrenaline gain. I also have the Relentless perk on my gear, but I will exclude it from all clips. So we have 3 greater abilities and the Limitless ability. The greater abilities are unlocked by buying a codex on the Grand Exchange. These codexes are a drop from Elite Dungeon 2. And the Limitless ability is unlocked through combining 2000 Vital Sparks, also buyable from the Grand Exchange or obtainable through the Magister, and of course through the Sophonim Slayer dungeon. Now, according to the PVME or PVM Encyclopedia Discord, you should get these abilities in this order. Keep in mind, upgrade order is always subjective, and for me, in fact, I got Flurry last. Now, are these abilities worth the money? Well, of course they are, but I'm going to show you what they can actually do in this video. So, Greater Barge. Why is it so expensive, and why is it so good? Well, simply said, it's a straight up upgrade. Greater Barge deals an additional 10% damage for every 0.6 seconds since you last hit your current target. So if you face away and then barge back onto your target, you will deal extra damage up to a maximum of 225% weapon damage. Now, the best part about Greater Barge is if you've waited 4.8 seconds or longer, you can bleed your next melee combo attack, which is incredible damage, because while you're bleeding that attack, you can also still use other abilities. Take a look at this example at the Ambassador, the final boss of Elite Dungeon 3. So I Zerk and I use Greater Barge on the Ambassador, and I then have 6 seconds to bleed a melee combo attack. The best ability for this, for the most amount of damage, is of course Assault. In the example you can see on screen, you can see how much damage it actually does, while I can also still use different abilities like Destroy, another threshold to deal even more damage during my Zerk rotation. I have an image showing you on screen what I'm actually doing during my rotation. This doesn't of course include my weapon switching or me re-equipping my Ring of Death, just simply the rotation to deal damage. If you're just using dual wield weapons, you can follow the exact rotation you can see on screen. Here are some other examples showing how much damage you can deal out by simply using Mutated Barge or Greater Barge. Now, of course, this works at many more bosses, and you can even use it mid-fight. Simply face away from the boss, wait 4.8 seconds, then barge back onto the boss and bleed Assault or Flurry. This is why Greater Barge is so expensive, and maybe because it's dropped from the final boss from Elite Dungeon 2, but still, it's undoubtedly the best greater ability out there. Just look at that damage. As for Greater Fury, this is an amazing ability if you like AFK Slayer, because the regular Fury ability is a cancellation or channeling ability. I like to call them cancel abilities because after 2 hits you usually cancel them out. This is the same for Conk Blast when talking about magic, but we're focusing on melee here. Now, apart from it being more effort to use regular Fury, it also gives you 100% critical hit chance on your next ability if Greater Fury crits, which is pretty cool. So this is what you normally do with Greater Fury, you cancel it out. This is something I explain in my DPS for beginners video. You let it hit twice and then you quickly cancel it out by using another ability to follow up. And this is what the greater version looks like. The greater version is fantastic for PVM and amazing for AFK Slayer. And Greater Flurry, the cheapest of the bunch, is a straight up upgrade if you're doing PvM and using this ability, because it will deal 157% weapon damage per hit instead of 94%, which is huge. That's a massive increase. In addition to that, if it hits any target per swing, the cooldown of Berserk will be reduced by 1.2 seconds each swing, up to a maximum of 4.8 seconds cooldown reduced. That is important if you're doing a boss where you want to use Berserk more than once before the boss is dead. Considering this ability is only 40 mil to upgrade, that's a significant upgrade for 40 million GP, from 94% to 157% weapon damage per hit. So we've talked about the greater abilities, now it's time to talk about Limitless, the most expensive of the four. Limitless will allow you to use thresholds at 15% adrenaline and above for 6 seconds once activated, and it has a 90-second cooldown. You should see this ability as an emergency ability or a second adrenaline potion, which can be used for a full rotation with extra thresholds if a monster or boss has low HP, or it can be used for a second Zerk rotation because that adrenaline potion is of course on cooldown because Berserk has a 60-second cooldown, so you could Zerk, use your adrenaline potion, do your rotation, and then the next time you would Zerk, you would use the sigil instead of the adrenaline potion because you can't use it a minute after. The first example you see here on screen is by using Limitless to get off extra thresholds very quickly after Zerking. You can see the rotation order excluding basics and other ring switches on screen. So as you can see, I Zerk, I barge into the dummy, I build up my adrenaline, and then I bleed my assault. I then switch back to dual wield and I try and get a little more adrenaline to use Destroy, which is one basic away. Then once Destroy hits 1 second on the buff bar, I use Limitless, and then I click on Mutated Flurry to use that threshold. Then before that's done, I quickly switch to my two-handed weapon, in this case my ZGS, to use Quake just before Limitless ends, which only lasts 6 seconds to get off 4 entire thresholds. Now if you're using a flanking switch, what you would do after using a Limitless is go ahead and use Mutated Flurry and then quickly switch to your flanking switch and use Forceful Backhand, switch back to your two-handed weapon and then use Quake. And if it's a boss you can walk, you could also use Slaughter afterwards because your Zerk is just about to end, walk your enemy and deal maximum damage with bleeds. Again, these are just some examples of what you can do with Limitless in your rotation. Now the next example of using Limitless will be much more relevant and applicable for most bosses, because you're going to be using Limitless most of the time as a second adrenaline potion for your second Zerk in a boss fight. So your initial first Zerk rotation during the boss fight will look something like this. If you do not have Mutated Flurry, the ability at the end, or Greater Flurry, you're going to be using Quake instead. But that would mean you'd have to use a two-handed weapon switch. Now in between those two Zerk rotations, I do use my ZGS spec, but that isn't relevant to this video. So the second Zerk rotation is as the following. Now it's almost the same thing, except instead of drinking your adrenaline potion, you do 2 basics first after barging, and then you use Limitless, because you need to be above a certain percentage of adrenaline to get off more thresholds. So, barge, 2 basics, Limitless, then quickly use Assault to bleed it just before the 6-second timer of Mutated Barge ends. Use 1 more basic, preferably Mutated Fury or Decimate. Then use Destroy, then use 2 basics, and your Zerk will have run out. Now something important to note is that when you want to barge, you want to wait until you see the barge icon on your buff bar, because then you know you'll get the ability to bleed your combo attacks. You can also clearly see the cooldown of my adrenaline potion, meaning that I'll have to use Limitless if I want to get off more thresholds in my Zerk rotation. So once more, let's have a look at what it looks like. Barge into, basic, basic, I then click on Limitless, boom, I can use my Soul Bleed, basic, destroy, and more basics. Now I mentioned this in my DPS for beginners video, but you want to prioritize your basics that do 188% weapon damage, being Cleave and Decimate. So I think we can all agree that Limitless is just a very good ability to get more thresholds off in a shorter period of time at all kinds of bosses. And this isn't just for melee, it's also for ranged and magic. It works in all 3 combat styles. But you can also use Limitless as a sort of backup if you're in sticky situations where you do not have enough adrenaline to cast certain defensive to protect you from dying. One example of this would be at the Ambassador again in Elite Dungeon 3. Now in the final phase of Ambassador, if you are called out by your name and if you're solo, it will always be you. You quickly need to pray magic and use devotion or other defensives to protect you from dying. Now in this particular example, devotion was on cooldown, so I wasn't able to use that ability, and so I used debilitate, but I didn't have enough adrenaline to use reflect as well, because otherwise I might have actually died. For those that don't know, if debilitate successfully hits and you then use reflect, the damage reduction is stacked up to a total of 75%. That's a lot better than 50%, especially when you're half HP. So I think I've made my point. Limitless can be useful in so many situations, and mutated or greater Barge is just ridiculously good damage. All of these greater abilities are worth it, and so is Limitless, and of course, they are expensive depending on your financial situation in RuneScape, but when you do have the money to spend, these abilities are absolutely amazing. I hope you guys learned something new. If you did, please leave a like down below and maybe even consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.
Wholesome? Am I not wholesome? Chat, type 1 if I'm toxic, type 2 if I'm wholesome, type 3 if I'm gonna die.
Type 3, guys.
Oh, Eric, dude!
What is that?
Kidding me?
See you, dude.
Eric, bro, you PK'd the out of me, bro.